I'm the executive director of Empower K-12, a DC-based nonprofit that helps support schools using data and analytics to improve. And we are here this morning to celebrate DC's bold performance schools once again in 2022. And without further ado, these are our bold performance goals for this year. These 14 schools serve predominantly priority student groups, students designated as at risk, students with disabilities, Black and brown kids, and they had park proficiency this year that exceeded expectations and also pre-pandemic averages. So I'm just going to turn to my right because I can't see, but it's Burroughs Elementary School for DCPS, Center City Congress Heights, Burrville Elementary DCPS, Langdon Elementary DCPS, Washington Global, KIPP DC Legacy College Prep, Garrison Elementary DCPS, Payne Elementary DCPS, Digital Pioneers High School, Paul PCS Middle School, Cesar Chavez Middle High School, Friendship Southeast, and Bridges Elementary School. Oh, and how did I skip that? Sorry, thank you, Roots. Small Roots Elementary School in Ward 8. Thank you, Roots team, appreciate you. All right, so Bold Schools. We've been doing this since 2016. We've been honoring schools for two different awards, Bold Improvement, which is based off of growth, and Bold Performance, which is based off of achievement. And essentially what we do is it's a beating the odds analysis. We're looking at who's exceeding expectations given the kinds of students that they serve. So why do we identify bold schools? Well, one of the main reasons is that there are performance gaps between some of our student groups here in the District of Columbia. Even before the pandemic, there were gaps. Those gaps were decreasing, but because of the situation of the pandemic, we know that those gaps have widened. Not just here, but also, and not just in reading, but also in math, but also nationwide, right? It's not just a thing in DC, but these bold schools are making an impact. So how do we identify them? Well, first we start by looking at the priority student groups, students designated as at risk, students with disabilities, our Black and African American students, our Hispanic and Latino students, our English language learners. And what we find across the district is the schools that serve more of these schools typically have lower achievement rates. This is typical of not just DC, but across the nation. But we dig into the data a little bit further. We know that there are some schools that are serving high percentages of these priority student groups who are making a huge difference. And what we find by using some of the advanced mathematical algorithms, right? These kinds of algorithms that are used by weathermen, right? Like calculate the weather. We use that same kind of math. And what we do is we dig in to really figure out what is a student's, and the metric that we use is called PPAE, or percent proficient above expectations. So what we do is we look at how far above the expectations that a school should have expected, given the demographics that they serve, is a school doing in terms of their achievement. And so what we find is, after we do this analysis, there's a group of schools that rose to the top. They're in orange. And so we look at, every time you do a prediction, there's some amount of error in the estimate, right? We want to make sure that we're looking at schools that are definitely exceeding that error in the estimate. And what we find are these 14 schools that are exceeding expectations. And we actually dig into their data. This chart shows you their park performance. In gray is the average park achievement rate for schools serving high percentages of priority student populations before the pandemic. Then the blue bar are the non-bold schools, the other 100 or so schools that are non-bold this year. And then in orange, those bold schools, those 14 schools whose proficiency rates are exceeding pre-pandemic averages. And again, these 14 schools. All right, so let's talk about these bold schools. We don't just identify them and celebrate them, and we will celebrate you. For those of you who are here, we are definitely going to have a celebration and awards ceremony next month. But we also wanted to dig in further to figure out what makes them so special. And so we went and asked them. We surveyed, we did site interviews, we did site visits, And so a part of that analysis, but we also wanted to look at the data that was made publicly available. So OSSE thank you, Dr. Christina Grant and your team, makes a lot of data publicly available. And we wanted to start there to see, is there something unique about these schools? And so we dug into the publicly available data. Right, last year we looked at chronic absenteeism, teacher experience, teacher retention, student retention to see, is there something different about these schools than the non-bold schools? And what we found are like slight differences here, but none of them were statistically significantly different. So it wasn't just that they had a difference in attendance or a difference in teacher retention. There was something else going on in these schools, which is why we did the surveys and the site visits. So when we talked to the schools, we heard a lot of things, but one of the things that we heard very frequently was an emphasis on fun and joy. These schools go above and beyond, and you can see here Friendship Southeast, Duct Tape the Principal, that there's a lot of emphasis on fun from the pandemic, and I think that they're continuing that, right? I think in a sense I felt like what I heard was an overemphasis on fun, right? The pandemic sucked for everyone. And they wanted to bring the fun and joy back into these students' lives. And so there was Fun Fridays, Boom Room in Langdon. Definitely, if the Langdon team is here, talk about the Boom Room back there in the back. Thank you. It's behaving and operating in an outstanding manner, the Boom Room. And in that Boom Room, we're like Nintendo Wii, games, books. They get 30 minutes on Friday to just do what they want because they've been really great at school. Relationship building. Relationships, from what we heard from these schools, they feel like relationships run the world. They run their school, right? Relationships with teachers among teachers, teachers and staff, teachers and students, or teachers and families, principals and families. Like, there's just a lot of relationship building that happens in these schools. Relationships to them these schools run the world. And so a lot of those things we heard were definite intentionality about going and doing home visits, bringing families into the building, their therapeutic approaches to just be like, what do you need for support? We actually heard a school that uses some of their funds that are supposed to be dedicated to mental health for students, but also for the mental health of their families. And I think that that's really important to give those families the support that they need in these times. We also heard a lot about extended learning time. From our charter schools, we heard that Center City returned a month early in 2021-22. We also heard that Roots added, 30 minutes beginning of the day and 30 minutes at the end of the day, an extra hour of learning instruction. But also for DCPS, there was a lot of, we heard a lot about Saturday Celebration Academies. And we heard about how students who attended Saturday Celebration Academies ended up attending more often during the regular school year. So they're working. And then also a lot of high impact tutoring that was happening during the school day, before and after. So those sort of extended learning opportunities. We also heard a lot about targeted interventions. And this is where some of those ESSER funds are coming in, those recovery funds from the federal government. We're allowing some of these schools to hire additional interventionists who pushed in and pulled out when necessary, but mostly a lot of push into the classroom to provide that small group one-on-one support for students. We also heard a lot about, we're gonna teach grade level curriculum. We know that students are coming into us sometimes more than a grade level behind, but we want them to be able to be successful here in our 5th grade classroom. So we're gonna give them 5th grade content, but to have that sort of push in small group tutoring support to make sure that they are able to access and be successful. And then we also heard a lot about the instructional support for teachers. Some of that was mental health, providing additional supports for them to be able to provide mental health supports to their students, those therapeutic approaches, but also a lot about just mental well-being for teachers and staff themselves, right? Like opportunities to have mindfulness, some yoga. There are other things that are mentioned in the report around this that were ideas, and I'm sure that there's even more across the city. And then we also heard a lot about data use. Like that nothing starts without, you can't start anywhere without the data. You gotta know where the gaps lie, but it's also, how does that data extend? There's like exit tickets, but then also some of these schools started giving wellness surveys for both their students and their teachers to be like, how are you doing? How are you feeling? So it wasn't just data that is hard data, but some of it was just classwork. Let's bring that classwork in. Let's look at the classwork. Let's look at those misconceptions in our students' work and really acting on it either that day or the next day. And what we found out is that like our teachers were examining data either daily or weekly. 100% of those teachers and school leaders that we surveyed said that their teachers review data either daily or weekly at the most. Not waiting till the end of the quarter, not waiting until assessment, daily, weekly. And some of the other key strategies that we found from schools that were sort of those top 6 that were most common, but we felt were important to notice, was like again, that push for teaching grade level content, initiatives that were really driven by student voice, student-led tutoring, student-led focus groups, a lot of student voice, a lot of teacher and leadership retention issues that they were trying to address. There is a sense, even from our bold schools, that educator burnout is a real possibility. Right? They're feeling it. How do we address that? I think there's a lot of research opportunities, Josephine, for us to look at teacher burnout. And before we start this video, we also did site visits. We did videos. This video, we got the raw footage just at the end of last week, and I put together a video over the weekend using that raw footage that you're just supposed to use for like storyboarding. So you will see like a timestamp on here. Note that this is just the start. We will have an actual professional crew pulling together some videos at our celebration event next month, and we'll be posting them online and then sharing for those of you who came and provided videos. We'll be giving you that content back.
Hi, my name is Shayla Turan. I go to Center City Congress Heights, and I'm in the 8th grade. We here at Center City, we have a really strong community. So like if anybody needs anything, we can come to one of the teachers and they'll always like let us know. Like they're like, oh, make sure you do this. They make sure that we get our grades, we keep our grades. Like earlier today, we helped the 4th graders with their subtraction, and like we just go into an empty room and we just go on the whiteboard and just show them problems, and we'll explain how you get the answer, and we'll let them do it by themselves and see if they got it right. And if they don't, we'll explain it on the whiteboard. Well, I think they've really pushed us like a lot, and I love that, because if I was like probably at another school, I would be like, oh, I don't know, it doesn't really matter. But they make sure that we know that it matters. It matters like what college we're going to, and our future and so forth.
Okay, my name is Dr. Shanita Pilgrim. I am the principal here at Burrville Elementary School, the Ville on the Hill. So we start, of course, with the data. But before the data, we got to get to know the kids. So every morning I'm standing outside greeting our students and calling them by names. I think it's important that they know that their principal knows each individual name at this school. And that builds community in such a different way that they know that I know who they are and they know who I am. With that, we do start with the data when we have our conversations with teachers. We're looking at the gaps that our students have and how we can close them. And so we know that that takes multiple data conversations. We know that it's not just academics here. How can we help them social emotionally as they are growing? How can we reach them when we know that they come to school with different needs and different areas of concern? And again, we can't do everything, but when they enter this building, it's important that they understand that we care and that we're going to do our best to support them and build on their needs.
My name is Kirsten Evans Brown, and I'm in 5th grade. Dr. Pilgrim is a very good principal, and I really respect her, and I love the things that she does to help around the school. And I think every teacher in the school and staff members are really important in the school because they help all the students in different ways.
Yes, my name is Hope Herod. I'm a 5th grade ELA and social studies teacher at John Burroughs Elementary School. I love Burroughs. I love teaching here because there are so many adults in this building who are so dedicated, and they really appreciate the role that they have in the lives of children. They're very dedicated to making sure that they are enriching and developing young people. It's important for teachers to understand what goes on in the classrooms of each other. And it's also important for teachers to align their philosophies and make sure that we're all aiming towards the same goal. So when you plan and when you get together as a community or as a learning unit, it's important for us to be very honest about what we're doing in the classroom and be able to share our goals and share our objectives with each other.
What's the secret?
I think for us, I think it's really knowing what our students' needs are, and that comes from analyzing the data and really thinking about specifically what individual children need. I don't think that we identify ourselves or our children as at-risk children, but we do identify children based on what their needs are. And I think we spend a lot of time really focusing on making sure that we're providing all the support that they need in order to be the best performer they can be.
So again, that is just the start. We had a lot more interviews coming, and there will be more videos coming out from these amazing educators and students at these 14 schools. We want to transition to the panel conversation, but want to start with the opportunity. We do know that there was a significant investment by our federal government in recovery from the pandemic. ESSER funds is what they're called. And those ESSER funds still, as of this August, there's still a significant amount of unspent funds, and those funds are supposed to be used for either reopening safely, which have been used, and then accelerating learning as another key focus. And so there's a lot of opportunity left to help recover quickly. And we know that we, in our report from the summer, we saw that for the first time since the start of the pandemic, that academic learning growth across the city was finally back to pre-pandemic norms during the spring semester. But we also know that if we continue at that rate, that the recovery just to get back to 2019 proficiency would take 5 years. And our goal, I think, should be to recover before these funds expire, right? And we can still be that first jurisdiction in the nation where our low income, our students designated as at risk, are performing just as well as students nationwide. In a week from now, NAEP tutor results will be released. They probably won't look great, but we do know that these 14 schools, amongst others, are doing some really fabulous work for our students designated as at risk, our students with disabilities, our Black and Brown students. And I want to transition now to a panel who can talk a little bit more about not just our education recovery, and I'm borrowing this from Principal Clinton at Walker Jones, our educational resurgence. And so, again, our recommendations are about coming up with bold goals, having a plan to really address it, but also investing in that research. We got to figure out what is working. We're spending a lot of money on different interventions right now, which is great. Our students need them. But we also need to figure out which ones are the working best, so like when those funds start to expire, that we are investing appropriately moving forward in the things that do work for our students. And oh, I forgot there's one more slide. We also asked in our survey about some of those bigger ideas that could be helpful for our students. These are the kinds of things that do require a lot of investment and a lot of conversation. These are just the start. So 100% of our educators that we surveyed said that they would be interested in potentially examining or wanting their additional mental health and interventionists that they're using those federal funds for to stay beyond the recovery dollars. 79% were interested in adding at least 45 minutes to the school day to continue to provide that additional support, but also to have that additional planning time within the school day that our educators need, right? So like having the interventionists there, having the high impact tutoring organizations in the building to like cover those additional time, because we know that like high impact tutoring actually is best when it's during the school day. And then another 30, we also asked, so less common, we also asked, would you like to rechange this school calendar? Because we know that one of the biggest drivers of educational inequality is actually summer learning loss. And so we asked, would you be open to changing the school calendar to address summer learning loss? And that was less. And so I will turn it over to the panel, which will be facilitated by Josephine Bias Robinson. She is the executive director of the DC Education Research Collaborative. And we have with us Dr. Michelle Walker Davis from the DC Public Charter School Board, Dr. Juana Bay from Interim Deputy Chancellor at DC Public Schools, Deputy Mayor Paul Kine, and State Superintendent Christina Grant.
We're clapping for everybody. Actually, I want us to clap again because as much as this is a discussion, this is truly a celebration of our bold schools, and I really want to acknowledge, appreciate, and demonstrate to you all how much we see your work, see you, and everything that you've done. And so I want to start by thanking you from the panel for your work. So if we could, one more time. Bold applause. And thank Josh and the Empower K-12 team for leading this effort. I am sitting here with some esteemed folks who have lots to say, and I want to get out of the way for the most part of the discussion that we're going to have by just asking a few questions that I know will lead to some insights that will be helpful to us. So Empower K-12's summer report on unfinished learning and academic growth during the last year found that the spring semester growths finally returned to pre-pandemic levels, as Josh said. And as Josh shared, we potentially won't see growth rates for another 5 years, return to the 2019 levels. So we want to make certain that we are doing work, especially for those students designated as at risk, and want to make certain that we use the learning that we have from these bold schools, from you all, to inform it, so that we can demonstrate that these strategies are not just significant for these bold schools, but fundamentally for all schools. So I just want to ask the folks here, generally, are these findings consistent with what you've seen? What are the surprises, if any? But in general, what's your overall response to the report? We can start with whomever, but I can start with Christina.
Yeah, we don't offer first, and so if you don't tell us, we won't start.
Just gotta tell you.
I want to, before I respond to the question, I do just want to honor the space that we're in. So a year ago, the same session looked dramatically different. We had a lot of COVID protocols in place. There were far less people in person. There are still people in this room today that I'm meeting for the first time. And that sounds surreal, but that truly grounds us in what we have experienced and are actively experiencing. And I don't want to lose that as we talk about hard topics like academic learning and how do we have a resurgence. We're going to borrow that at OSSE. So please give us who we should give credit to. But I do want to name that as an education community, we have come far and we have a lot longer to go, but we are gathered in person without masks, engaging in a conversation together. And as we go in schools, I see levels of joy in schools that are unparalleled because children, teachers, principals are excited to be back in the art of school. So I want to name that. Before naming, I think all of us were prepared to see what learning loss would look like, sound like in the data as we all understood the fundamental importance of school. And so I think as a nation, we learned that school is more than just places where we send children. The learning that exists, the relationships, the magic. I was at Center City Brightwood yesterday, and we definitely had magic at the school. And it's the magic of teaching and learning that when it's absent, when it disappears for 18 months or it doesn't look like and sound like what we expect the magic that occurs inside of a classroom to look like and sound like, that plays out in the data. And so in some ways, I'm not surprised to see the declines. But in the true spirit of resurgence, what I have seen that, as I'm still getting my sea legs in Washington, D.C., is the unapologetic commitment to look at the data and charge forward. And that has been humbling, amazing to see leaders at all levels say, oh, we took these hits, we will get back better, stronger, and we will celebrate schools that even in the midst of amazing adversity, we're able to get gains, see progress, and serve as beacons of light around what's possible. And I hope that it won't take 5 years. In fact, I know it won't take 5 years. But I'll stop there and pass. Am I passing down?
Yes, pass it down.
Pass it down. So I want to join in the extraordinary congratulations to the folks in this room. This is clearly the way all of us should be spending all of our time in rooms full of school practitioners who are doing phenomenal work for our city and for our city's youth. So thank you all very much. It is humbling to be here. I would say that from my perspective, I see the work over the next several years in the context of some tension, because one of the things that is true is while Josh has done the great work of identifying similar practices across schools, I can guarantee you that every school in this room does things differently, does things very differently. And so one of the fundamental truths of our education system is this tension where you've got to empower schools and school people and adults and buildings to be autonomous, to do work in their own ways based on the needs of the very different children that they have in their buildings. And at the same time, you want to provide resources that are somehow consistent, that have some scale to them, that will benefit the school people in the schools that want to just take advantage of those things differently. So for example, as we look to the next several years and we take up the charge of the resurgence in our education system, as a city, what we're trying to do is support the conditions of success. So if there's going to be extended learning time, which is number 3 on this list, we think about what are the ways in which we can offer supports to schools to do that in their own way. If we're talking about number 4, targeted small group and individual student interventions, we want to provide some additional people that will help schools to do that, as we have done so far, in the form of tutors and other partners. So there is that tension that exists for us, but we're working hard to create the conditions. I will say one final thing, which is there is clearly nothing more important than the people in this room and the people in your schools. It is truly the adults that are making all of the difference. And what I love about this report and what I love about this conversation that we have every year is it brings us back into the level of transactions within buildings between grown-ups and children that are the only thing that matter. If those are strong and of good quality and focused on the right stuff, our kids are going to thrive. And so we also have to collectively work to ensure we've got people in our buildings who want to be there, who love being there, who know what to do. And so a lot of our work over the next several years, in response to the question, is around school people and educators.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Just want to reiterate what was already stated in terms of just how proud we are of the schools, the school leaders, the students, the staff that represent the schools that have been identified as bold schools this year. In DCPS, when we answer the question around, is this what we expected? Generally speaking, yes. And even outside of the pandemic or prior to the pandemic, we know that performance, particularly around the opportunity gap, was not what we wanted to see, right? We were making steady progress, and we want to continue to make steady progress, but even in spite of COVID, we realized that we have to take a holistic approach when it comes to the needs of our students. And so in DCPS, we have been very intentional prior to COVID and definitely as a result of COVID in making sure that we take a holistic approach as it relates to supporting students. So that's through our social emotional work, that's through our academic work, that is through the acceleration academies and the high impact tutoring that has taken place. All of those things we realize are essential in making sure that we're meeting the needs of all of our students, particularly our students of color and students that are furthest from opportunity. And so it's so exciting to see so many schools that have been identified across sectors that have been making those gains and continue, in spite of some of the challenges that we've experienced over the last few years, to continue to focus on our students from a holistic point of view, and not just through an academic lens, but through the other lens that we know that are needed to meet their needs.
Good morning. I will echo the sentiments of my colleagues here on the panel and first start by congratulating all of our schools. It is wonderful to be in a space where we're actually talking about academic achievement and we're talking about data and not COVID, and that we are in partnership with all of us here as education leaders. like everyone has said, no, we were not surprised by the data, but I do want to make a couple of points here. One is that, as I understand it, the PPAE is really about the conditions around our schools and not about the potential of our students, right? And so when we look at a measure like that, I want, from a data perspective, I absolutely understand it. I understand the intent of the metrics, and I appreciate being able to be in a space where we're talking about the quote unquote beating the odds. But from a moral perspective, I absolutely reject the notion that our priority students are unable to achieve at high levels, right? And so that is why a report like this that underscores where and how and what schools are doing to make that possible is really important. And that's the conversation that I want to have and that I want to continue to sit in, right? And so, no, I'm not surprised by the data, but yes, I am excited that we are here talking about all of the things that schools are doing to beat those odds and to make those outcomes different outcomes for our students. I am frustrated about the amount of time that it can take based on the analysis, right? So our challenge is for it, as Dr. Grant said, to not take as much time. But what that is going to require is not only on our LEA leaders, right? It is about all of the conditions and the inputs around our LEA leaders and around our schools to make that possible. And so as I think about this, we sit on the end of this equation. We measure outcomes. Did you meet your goals? And we take actions accordingly. But I sit in conversations with my colleagues here regularly so that we could talk about what those inputs need to look like. So we could talk about what our city is doing to support our schools. And so I will continue to be in those conversations too, even as we measure the outcomes on the end. But I just want to be clear that this is the conversation that we need to be having. What does it take to produce outcomes that beats the odds? And what will it take to accelerate the amount of time that we need to, that we have, quite frankly, to focus on those outcomes?
So I think that's an excellent point that I also want to amplify a little bit in a question that's a little bit off the script. A former chancellor once said, you can't serve the people if you don't love the people. And what this report underscores is love and joy being central and critically important to it. And you've all spoken about it generally, but you're also agency heads, you're leads. You're not in the classrooms, you're not in front of students daily. And so how specifically, as agencies within the systems and the structures that you lead and support, can you encourage this aspect of joy and empathy that supports our students? Since we're doing this, you're first.
So here's the thing. I was first the last time. And it's interesting. I like the framing around serving the people versus loving the people. The way that DC is structured, I'm not sure that I would say that, because I'm an agency head, I don't, I was in a school yesterday talking to a principal who had served for 10 years, and 2 of our finalists for Teacher of the Year were in that same school. And so the through line between sitting at the top, or however you want to define what it means to be a superintendent of education, the truth is I was a classroom teacher, and I was a principal, and I built a charter network. And so part of the experiences that you hear amongst all of us is the true continuum of servant leadership and the loving of people and loving of children. So you can walk into a school, and it's important that you can walk into a school and see learning and see love at the same time playing out amongst kids. You can go into a school and see a principal duct taped to a wall, and you can experience joy. And also, I'm like, oh, that could have been a fascinating math problem. How many strips does it take? Which colors, right? And so I think all of the work we do is grounded in love. I think if COVID didn't teach us anything, and I would say, and Dr. Nesbitt has said, that our comprehensive school-based testing program, hands down, was one of the best in the country. It was modeled by other jurisdictions and states, both near and far, and all of that work was done in deep love. I remember all of us being on a phone call on Christmas Eve, we're going to figure out how to get these schools back open, and we're going to figure out how to get our children back. And at OSSI, that meant standing on a loading dock and handing out test kits to charters so that when they were ready to open, they could open. And so I think what you will hear when we came into the room, there's hugs and smiles and greetings, because we spend a lot of time together in service to all of our schools. And so Love has to lead at agencies. It has to lead inside our schools, but it's grounded in, and I said this to everyone, so I'll say it to you all. If COVID would have happened when I was a child, I would have been home by myself. Full stop. Both my parents were essential workers. And so the work that drives me in the work and my colleagues is in the day-to-day reality of how important schools are, how important it is that our children show up every single day to adults that love and care for them. And it's our actual job to align resources to needs that are grounded in learning, but also grounded in love. And so I love the framing of the question, but there's love at OSSE. There's love at the Public Charter School Board. There is love in the DME, and there is certainly love at DCPS. And so I'm going to give it to Michelle to break up this through line.
I don't know if I'm going to break up the love and joy. I will say this. I was excited when I was able to start going into school buildings. And absolutely, yes, I look at what's on the walls. I look for the data. I look for all of the technical things that you look for. I look at instruction and all of that. But what I felt when I walked in the school and what I wanted to feel was the joy, not just of the children, but the adults in the building. That is palpable, right? And I do believe fundamentally, while it's much harder to measure joy in the school context, if it doesn't exist, everything that we're trying to do is really not going to happen, quite frankly. Children have to feel like they are safe and that this is a place that they want to be, and adults also have to feel safe and that this is a place that they want to be for that magic that Dr. Grant talks about to work. And so I noticed that. I mean, and I will argue that you will see that in the results. In places where there is not that chemistry, you will see it in the results. I can't measure it probably to the extent that Empower K-12 can measure what the absence of that looks like, but it is important. And I would say that this is tough work. Education is tough. It was tough work before the pandemic. None of us were trained and prepared for what we just experienced. And yet we did it together. And I think that probably energizes us even more to show up every day to continue to do this work. Because at the other end of whatever it is that we're doing, and there are days when I feel I am so far removed from a child that I'm trying to connect the dots here. But there is never a day when you do this work that you see that spark in a child's eye or a young person's eye and not feel like, absolutely, this is the reason why I do this work. So.
Wow, to piggyback off of that, I mean, when we talk about measuring joy, in DCPS, we measure love, whether our students feel loved, whether they feel challenged, whether they feel prepared. We actually measure that, and it is very important to us because if we don't listen to our students, if we don't know what their experiences are and how they're feeling about their educational environment, we're missing the mark. And so when I think about sitting in this seat, sitting in the various seats that I've sat for the last 24 years, I think about making sure that students have connection, right? You can't love me or create a joyful environment for me as a student or as a staff person without knowing who I am, without the walls and the building and the curriculum reflecting who it is that I am. When I think about joy and love that we create in DCPS, I also think about those outcomes that you talk about, right? Like it's not just a data point. One of our instructional superintendents, we've been really leaning in on early literacy, and she said, the way that we show our students the love, the way in which we show that we care about equity is we make sure every single student knows how to read by the time they leave second grade. Like that is how we show love and joy for our students. We show it through making sure all of our high school students are prepared to be able to go into the workforce or into college. And so it's very important. One can't exist without the other, and making sure that, again, to piggyback off of what you said, that our adults feel that as well. When we look at last school year, and folks were burnt out. When we think about staff absence in terms of the turnover that was taking place, and we realized that we really needed to listen to our students as well as our staff and respond to their needs and making sure that they're whole, so that they are able to provide the proper service for our students. So yes, joy, schools can't exist without joy. And because we love our students, we are committed to making sure that we're actively monitoring and getting feedback from our students, from our staff, as well as our parents to ensure that we create that joy and sustain that joy within our buildings.
So, when was the last time a senior government official brought joy to your school?
Yesterday, Ross. I brought a lot of joy.
I will be brief. We have thought a lot about this from the perspective of attendance from my office. So we've been running everyday counts, and a big part of attendance is about joy and kids feeling loved and a sense of belonging. And the ways that we have thought as a city administration about how to promote that is through events, swag that we deliver, rewards, joyful moments, and then convening adults in buildings so folks can share different ways in which they have worked to provide joy to their school communities. So those are the things that we've done.
Thank you. This is an excellent, I think, conversation and discussion relative to how joy and how leadership really does matter at all levels, and that we all have responsibilities throughout to ensure that we are supporting the environments for kids, that there's a balance that we have to strike, and that balance is also understanding who our children are, what they bring. And so want to dig a little bit into the data that we have and that we've learned from both the BOLD schools, but also what you all know. Because we know that students designated as at risk, and while I appreciate Hope's comments that we know what students need, we're learning about students, but we do know that at-risk students make up nearly half of all DC public school students. And they're on average 15 to 18 months behind pre-pandemic national average. So we need plans. And so I would love to hear, I know our folks would love to hear what some of our plans are to serve these students and some of the practices and strategies that fundamentally are non-negotiable. We've talked a little bit about what we expect in schools and the environment, but what really are non-negotiable things in every school to support these students. So I will start with Druana.
Well, within DCPS, we realize that every student is different. The needs of every student is different, and we need to make sure that our services and our supports reflect that. And so, we implement a multi-tiered system of support. So you'll hear an acronym called MTSS, in which we are really looking at data, and not just from an academic lens, but from a social emotional lens, as well as an attendance lens, to triangulate that data and really dig into what is it that student needs in order to perform. And so we look at it from a tier 1 level, meaning all students. What is it that we expect in our classrooms and within our school buildings to make sure that all students are able to learn? And then from there, digging into tier 2 and tier 3 supports that are more individualized to really meet the needs of a very diverse population that we have. And so when I think about just even last year in terms of MTSS, we track centrally to make sure that, our schools are saying that they're providing those supports. What do those supports actually look like, and our students meeting the goals that we set? And I can say that over 38% of our students last year were in tier 2 or tier 3, meaning they were receiving additional support even outside of tier 1, which is our normal classroom instruction, in order for them to meet their goals. And so it's really important to us to make sure that we're looking at it from a multi-tiered, multi-pronged approach. In addition to that, I think it was already stated around looking at student data in terms of looking at student work. We really have leaned into this year making sure that all of our teachers and our school leaders are looking at student data on a weekly basis, at minimum a weekly basis. So we're implementing weekly data meetings across all of our schools, not just elementary, but middle schools and high schools, to strengthen our our school leaders in implementing those processes, as well as making sure that teachers are able to look at real-time data and make appropriate pivots based upon that data. And so we talk a lot about what's the reteach look like, identifying and making sure that we understand what that gap is, which also strengthens teachers in terms of their planning and preparation for the next lesson. So those are some of the things that we have done previously and that we continue to lean in on. I will also say the high impact tutoring is definitely an area of focus, both during or after, as a result of COVID, and we're strengthening that now. We have many schools across our system that are partnering with different external partners to make sure that we have that high impact tutoring to make sure that we're able to continue to support our students.
I'll be happy to jump in briefly and share. My colleagues here, Dr. Bay is doing phenomenal work at DCPS. It's happening across the charter sector. Dr. Grant is leading an extraordinary body of differentiated work from OSSE's perspective with high impact tutoring and other things that goes right to the heart of this question around our students who are designated as at risk. From the systems perspective, I also want to name a couple things that I think are equally important. One is money. And I say that because DCPS doesn't get enough credit for the fact that for the first time, it is now ensuring at-risk dollars go to the schools that are serving at-risk students. So a key part of the new DCPS budget model is ensuring that at-risk dollars flow exactly where it's required. Secondly, we have a new set of common financial reporting standards, which are being stood up across the city for all schools. So they will track exactly how schools are spending their at-risk dollars, so we can figure out with Josh and others what's working with our at-risk students. So to this research point, that's a new system that we have put in place. And of course, we've increased the funding for at-risk students by adding an incremental weight for students who are overage in high school, and council added a weight for a concentration of at-risk students in schools. So in all of these ways, we're trying to get more resources where they belong. I will say one final thing, which is it's not just what's happening in schools, as we all know. It's what's happening in community. It's what's happening on the way to and from school. And so my office and the administration and city government and everyone up here is also deeply focused on things like safety. We cannot educate students if they're not in a position to be ready to learn when they show up. And so we are focusing on trying to ensure kids can travel safely to and from school. We are focusing on trying to provide additional mental health supports in community and in school as well. So all of this complex array of work actually goes to how we're supporting students in their journey, their learning journey.
Yeah, I would just reiterate what I said before, that we measure outcomes. So we are not engaged at the LEA level about how specifically they support students. But I think one of the important things is over the last year, we implemented a strategic roadmap. It serves as our North Star. And in that roadmap, we isolated and really emphasized that our work is about the outcomes for DC students. And that means looking at our data differently, right? So we are launching a new accountability framework. I will not bore you to death to all of the details about our accountability framework, but what is important about that is that we're going to be highlighting data for specific student groups in ways that we haven't done before, right? So yes, absolutely, that is about measuring those outcomes, but it will give us information that we haven't had in the charter sector specifically that is tied to the outcomes for that charter. Right? And so we're going to be right now engaging with our LEA leaders about what those measurements need to look like. But at the heart of that, it is about focusing on the students historically marginalized, furthest from opportunity, and really looking at what those outcomes look like compared to other student groups, right? And so that's our work, to shine a light on where our problems are, but not in a punitive way for schools. Absolutely, there will be consequences tied to that for schools, but it is an opportunity for all of our city leaders and others to think about, if these are the data, then what do those inputs and resources need to look like, both for the schools, but also around schools to produce different results.
Can I ask Christina, before you speak, if you could focus a little bit on students with disabilities as well? As I've heard everybody speak, one thing I also want to lift up is this population of students and what OSSE in particular is doing.
Sure. So again, the first question on, were we surprised by the data? I think the one thing we saw is, there were declines across all 8 wards, all subgroups, right? So like the effects of the pandemic played out across our entire district. And so I don't want to say please, but we are all aligned on what it means to improve. And so this isn't something that our children caused. This is, in a lot of respects, something that adults didn't cause. But this is the reality we find ourselves in, and collectively we are working to move forward. And that is a source of that is. I am pleased that we are all aligned and not trying to sauce out, like, who is the enemy. We have a common enemy. We must battle them together. With respect to special education, that was work that OSSI had begun to work on, improve upon, long before we even knew the word COVID. And we get to see just how fast and far we've moved that work forward. And so one thing we're really excited about is we've opened a special education hub that is open in community so that families have a place to go to get resources and supports, even as they think about navigating the complexities of special education in any school system, and particularly in Washington, D.C. Because if any of you have ever had a child with unique disabilities, from the first conversation through getting supports, through attending your first IEP meeting, to ensuring your services are in place, that's overwhelming for any parent. It's even more so overwhelming for a parent that may be furthest away from resources, et cetera. And so we're excited that the Family Resource Center is open. We did it in partnership with our ombudsman. And again, another unique way that agencies can come together. Like, it wouldn't have served families well if OSSI, if the Family Resource Center was sitting in our office. That isn't helpful. It is very helpful that it is sitting in communities where families need to have access to it. I think we were talking about frameworks. I won't bore you again, but we are excited that we have a special education performance framework that does look at outcomes, but also tells a school, tells a family two things. How are you in terms of being in compliance with special education needs for children, but also which special education supports do you have robust set of systems of supports for? So as a parent is looking at a school, they can say, oh, you actually have a whole team of individuals just focused on this one unique aspect of learning. I should look at this school in terms of where I want to send my child. Last but not least, Michelle referenced it. You know, the big work of a state education agency is providing supports for the educators. And so we are really excited that we have launched a series of micro-credentialing for special education. I would love to get to a world where every educator is required to do micro-credentialing for special education, because a general education teacher should know how to identify, track, and support any learning modality of a child. And we love that micro-credentialing is a way that this learning can be done at home, low cost, on your own, but that teachers would get access to understanding what does it mean to support all the learners in my classroom. And so thanks for framing the question around special education, because it's a critical core component of the overall conversation around supporting our learners. And everyone spoke about high impact tutoring. From our perspective, I think if you think about your own learning journey, it is a great fortune to be able to have access to a tutor. And in Washington, D.C., we are making sure that lives and breathes in all of our schools. And we have 76 schools where over 70% of those students are at-risk learners, and they are targeted first for high-impact tutoring investments and supports. One, so that from a cognitive space, our children are learning, but from a social space, they understand the importance of a tutor from a very young age. And that it's a part of their socialization into learning, that it is okay to sit with Paul and go over my math problems. And I didn't do anything wrong, and Paul's not upset with me, and there is actually no grade. Paul is just here to help me, much like the students in the video. We're just gonna go in a classroom and do subtraction problems because you need some support with subtraction, and we're gonna help you. Like, we have to rethink some of the ways that certain children have been taught to think about their learning, and others have not had access to think those ways. And tutoring is one of those bridges that helps a child understand that they get to own their learning and be in safe spaces to get support.
Thank you. So we are coming to the end of our time, but I want to ask one last question that hopefully we can be quick about before we move to the audience. No, we're good. But we're going to see NAEP results in the next few weeks, right? So want to give you all a chance to share what you want the public to know and understand beyond the numbers and the headlines.
Yeah, I can start. I guess it's everything that we just said for the last hour, that our children and our students and our teachers are more than the data. The data is an opportunity for us to shine a light on where we have to do specific targeted interventions. To Dr. Grant's point, I am thankful that we have a culture where we can spend hours in the morning talking about data and talking about what it means, and being prepared not just to talk about it, but to take action. So I know that our LEA leaders are prepared for what they're going to see, and I would just encourage all of us to not focus on the problem, but focus on the solutions. And there are a number of solutions presented in this report, a number of solutions that my colleagues here have been talking about, and recognize that this is not a short sprint, right? We're in a marathon here, and we need to prepare ourselves for the energy that it will take to meet the task.
Yeah, I 100% agree. What I want them to know is that, there's no silver bullet to this work. If it was, we would all be doing it, right? And to the point that Paul made, every school is different, every school community is different. This is one data point. We know when we look at data that you don't look at a data point in isolation. And so, we're anticipating the data coming out. We have already other data points that speak to, we are making those gains. We are making gains in terms of making up for some of the dips that we anticipate. And for folks to realize that we are urgent, right? This is something that we are committed to, we've been committing to, and that, our students are more than just an isolated data point, as well as our schools.
Well, when we see NAEP, there's going to be the inevitable hand-wringing. People seem to love to hold the education system, whatever that is, up and criticize it. What I would say is, when we get the NAEP results, we should hand out copies of this report alongside it, because there is a topography to our system that demonstrates so much of what is beneficial for so many students. And we have seen extraordinary resilience and strength in the pandemic. And our results would have been a lot worse on NAEP if you all had not been doing the work you were doing. That's the story that we are going to try to get into the public communications on the NAEP results.
I was nervous about this question. I think right before OSSE released our PARCC assessment results, President Jessica Sutter of the State Board of Education had penned an op-ed that essentially said, we are going to see results that are going to be sobering, but we need to be grounded in the data that we see. We need to come together, we need to analyze data, we need to put a path forward in play so that we can see the improvement and put ourselves back on track. But this isn't a moment where we point fingers or, we see it and then we move forward. And I think of her words as we get through this final hurdle of releasing our data. Our children participated in all assessments across one spring term. So they did PARCC, they did NAEP, they did science, they did all of them. And I'm so proud. We had almost a 95% participation rate across all of our assessments while we were navigating a COVID surge in the first year of being fully open in a pandemic. And so I'm grounded in the pride around how we feel about the importance of assessments and what the data tells us as we chart our path forward. And so I hear President Sutter's voice saying, yeah, we're going to see the data. It's going to be hard data. And then we're going to look at it, we're going to unpack it, we're going to pull it apart. And the schools, especially some of the folks in this room, are going to charge us and say, this is what we need to get back in the game. And so that would be my thoughts as we get through the next phase of releasing information. Washingtonians are quite proud of their education system, and I know that we're going to work together to take this data and be ready for our next NAEP assessment. So that's how I would think about it.
Thank you. Thank you, panel. I just want to check and see, do we have time for one or two questions from the audience? All right. Who's going to start? Just want to raise your hand, I will bring a mic to you. Going once. All right, there we go.
My question, I don't know if you would have the answer or not specifically, but I'm curious about if there's a difference between the Bold schools and other DC schools in the rates of inclusion with students with disabilities.
Would you have the answer?
I wouldn't have the exact
Yeah.
answer to that. only surveyed the bold schools. We did not survey the non-bold schools.
I'd like to acknowledge that I think is an excellent question.
Do we have another?
Hi, Faith.
Thank you to the panel, and I was so excited to see two of my neighborhood schools as bold schools, both Burroughs and Langdon. So my question is actually around not just the relationship between adults and students in the building, but also what bold schools do with parents in order to make sure that it's possible, because there has to be a connection and partnership there in order to make that happen.
Should we invite a bold school to answer the question? Or Dr. Bay?
To the mic.
I mean, what I would say is in certain, I just think of yesterday, we announced our Teacher of the Year. There was this powerful moment where they were celebrating their teacher, and the entire school broke out in their school song. And it was amazing. It was magical. Like, the children were so proud. And this school has the highest attendance rate of all public charter schools. And it was everything that you're referencing. Like, they know every single parent. They know how far the child lives from home. The teacher who won literally is the first person who says hi to every parent and every child every morning. And he is the last person to send them home. And he knows the parents by name. In fact, like, he got the award sitting there. And so that relationship that exists between parents and schools is palpable. But I would offer, is there a school here that wants to talk about their parental relationships?
We actually do have one. Principal Kimmy Husbands at Langdon.
Hi, everyone. I am Kimmy Baltimore Husbands, and I'll stand here so everyone can see me. But yes, one of our 3 priorities at Langdon, and I know Langdon is a representative of many of the other bold improvement schools, is just really being clear and intentional with setting goals around relationships and looking at relationships as overlapping and being intentional with including parents. Even with that, just changing the mindset of how we define parent involvement. I've been in education since 1997, and it's the typical PTO parent, and you come from parent-teacher conferences. No. Parent-teacher involvement needs to broaden. I always lead my schools being transparent. I am a parent of 2 children, and I tell my community I can barely make my own children's PTO meetings because I'm here. So, just like it's not fair for us to judge our parents, I am that parent in my kids' school, so I have to redefine parent involvement. Part of that is just changing the time that we're meeting with parents, offering 2 meetings, one in the mornings for parents that are available in the mornings, some in the afternoon. The virtual platform has also helped us as well in offering just impromptu town hall meetings with hardly anything on the agenda. We want to hear from you all. Taking time to go to the cars and interfacing with parents. We also have a sheet, and I'm so excited because we are now allowing our parents back in the building. But when parents come for informal visits, and I tell my school, we will never deny our parents. Like, if they want to come up, they have 20 minutes, they can come. But we want that feedback. And so after you visit the classroom for 15 minutes, they have a quick little feedback sheet to let us know what were their takeaways, any questions that they have. And so just those small but intentional pieces of how we're trying to redefine prioritizing our relationship and letting our parents know that we value them.
Thank you.
Morning. So my question was also about parents, and thank you for all of the insight. So I guess my second question is, could you talk about some of the barriers that you've experienced as it relates to parent engagement and family engagement? I think, we know what works and what's great, but I'd be interested to hear what are some of the barriers that educators have faced in engaging parents and vice versa.
Any other school leaders want to respond?
I will help you here. I'm Russ with Center City. So the barriers typically, one of the schools honored today is our Congress Heights campus for Bold Distinguished, and that's that's the school that for a long time had the lowest level of parent engagement, at part, because the leaders felt like there was a lot of resistance from their families, and we've slowly but surely made inroads in that regard. But some of the lessons we've learned across all of our campuses are there are a lot of families that they don't want you in their house. So we've learned to meet people at restaurants and things or meet people in parks, right? You meet people where they're comfortable meeting with you. So that shifted because for a long time, it was defined as home visit. And now for us, it's defined as family visit, right? So we're not as focused on getting in the homes. We're focused on making sure we visit with the family, and we're okay if you want to come eat at the school as well. So we've evolved in that regard, and you just try to make sure you're meeting people where they're most comfortable and what works for them. And there's lots of reasons why families maybe don't want you to visit their home, and it's understandable. And so that practice for us has just evolved. So.
Hi, Courtney Miller with Cesar Chavez Public Charter Schools for Public Policy. I think we also have to look at how we measure parental involvement. A lot of times we measure it by the attendance roster and the number of parents who have attended events. And like the principal said, I have 2 children, and a lot of the times their dad may be going to some of the events at their schools. But just because you're not physically in the building does not translate into a non-present parent. So for us at Chavez, a lot of that connection looks like accessibility. So parents know that they have access to their teachers, they have access to their principals, they have access to their head of schools, and we're very, very responsive so that we're attentive to what they need, and not just in terms of why did my child get this grade on an assignment or an assessment, but what my child may need and how they feel in the building. So I think we also have to reevaluate how we measure parental involvement, because it's more than just how many parents show up at a PTO meeting, because there may be parents that have restrictions and constraints that prevent them from being present in the building but not present in their scholars' lives.
As a former chief of family and public engagement at DCPS, this makes my heart sing, hearing all of this and how we've also evolved to understand the importance of parent engagement and the mindset shift that we undergo to make certain that we appreciate and respect what parents bring. They are their first teachers to their students. They are the ones who know the most about their children. And so respecting, honoring, and appreciating what they bring in the package that they bring it is really important. So thank you for the questions about that.
She was like, and we're done.
First, I want to say congratulations to these 14 bold performance schools. For those of you online and those of you in this room, keep that love going. We've talked a lot about joy and love today. Let's bring this love to these 14 schools. If you're joining us online, go to Twitter, tag them, give them love. Go to Facebook, tag them, give them love. But we know that these won't be the only 14 bold schools. We know that when we come here a year later, we expect to see a record number of bold schools. And for me to just sum up real quick, we did talk a lot about love, and we also talked about achievement. And sometimes in conversation, they get de-linked from each other. But they're not, right? It's not just that there's a correlation. There's actually causational data behind this. The latest brain science research shows us that when students are experiencing chronic stress or trauma, the biochemicals that the brain produces actually inhibit those brain cells from growing, right? And when they feel love and joy, the biochemicals are actually making those brain cells grow and double and triple in record numbers, right? And so when we have that foundation of that love and that joy, and then when we pair that with really effective instructional strategies, the interventions, the rigor in the classroom, that's when we know our students can thrive. And we know that our students designated as at risk can not just exceed pre-pandemic expectations in the next 3 years, which I hope we all agree is a goal, but that if we can do that in 3 years, we know by the end of this decade, on that 2030 NAEP, our students designated as at risk will outscore the national average. And we look forward to doing that work with the bold schools in this room. Those of you online, just know that we thank you for all of your hard work. It's been a rough 2 years. We know that you're probably feeling the burnout. Let's dig into that. Let's celebrate you, because we need you for the next decade. So thank you for coming today. Thank you to our panel, to Dr. Bay, to Dr. Michelle Walker-Davis, to Dr. Grant, Deputy Mayor Paul Kine, Josephine, thank you. To my staff, thank you. You've really been helpful this entire. We did this in record time, and it takes a team effort to do that. And so thank you for coming. Continue the conversation, and we will see you again here next year when we recognize a record number of Bold Schools.